This is the Lockpicking Lawyer, and today I wanted to talk about some special tensioning considerations that you might want to take into account when picking dimple locks. This is a follow-up to my video number 188 entitled My Approach to Lockpicking Tension. In that video, I indicated that I would be following up with some thoughts on more advanced tensioning topics in the future. Well, it took me a little while, but this is the first of those videos. If you've not seen video 188, I encourage you to watch that one first because this video isn't designed to stand alone. It supplements the concepts and the approach to tension that I discussed in that video and only sets forth a few dimple-specific considerations. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is tension tool selection. With a standard pin tumbler lock, a tension tool, or selection of your tension tool, is often guided most strongly by what doesn't interfere with the pick. We talked about this in video 188. But with dimple locks, I often find myself choosing tension tools to more directly aid in my picking. Let me explain. One of the biggest challenges to picking dimple locks is locating the pins that you need to pick. And that is because if your pick is not inserted perfectly straight, parallel to the keyway as you go straight down, then it can become relatively difficult to locate the pins. And I struggle to do that, particularly in the very back of the lock. And when that happens, you end up picking the warding, slipping off the pins, or rubbing the warding in a way that hampers your feedback. Now, for many dimple locks, the keyways are such that there is a bit of warding that you can use to guide your pick down the keyway perfectly straight. And this ABIS keyway is one example of that. You can see we have a little bit of warding right here on the right side. I can slip the pick right against that, and I know as long as my pick is up against that piece of warding, that the tip of my flag will be centered under the pins. And if you can do that, great. It's very, very helpful, and your pick will always be in the right spot. And if that is the case, you can have your tension tool selection guided solely by the criteria in 188. On other locks, you have the option of guiding your pick off of the edge of the keyway. And if we look right here, we can see there's a nice flat bit. I guess we should use a different pick. There's a nice flat bit on the side of the keyway, and I can use that to guide my pick straight down, and it will center the tip of my flag right under the pins. Again, if you can do that, great, because you can massively simplify your choice of tension tools. But for other locks, there's a wide open keyway, and keeping the pick perfectly straight can be a real challenge. So if you've watched my channel for long, you've seen tension tools like this when I pick dimple locks. And I don't think I've ever really explained exactly why I use them when a normal wiper insert would suffice for picking dimple locks. Well, this is the reason. Take this multi-lock interactive, for example. You can see that we have a relatively open keyway here, and if we look carefully, there really isn't enough room such that you can insert a pick on the right side. If you do that, it ends up lifting the pins too much and you overset the lowest cuts. There's also no bit of warding on the left side that allows you to guide the pick. And for multi-locks in particular, having precision pick placement is really, really important because you have to pick both the inner and outer pins. So what I do is I use a fat, massive tension wrench to fill up the side of that keyway. And then I use the side of that tension tool to guide my pick as it goes straight down. So I know as long as I am right up against the side of that tension tool, I'll always be centered underneath the pins. It's a really, really helpful technique, and it will massively increase your picking precision. So, not all the keyways are wide open like this multi-lock. Some keyways have really complex wording. Look at this one, for example. Obviously, you're never going to fit a big, thick tension wrench in here. It's almost silly to even try. So, that is why in my pick case, I always keep a variety of these Z-bars. I've never really showed you all of them, and I line them up just like this so you can see all the different profiles of Z-bars that I keep in my pick case, and I can always find one that can be perfectly situated in the keyway such that I'll always have something to run my pick down, and as such I'll be well guided in my pick placement. If you're wondering where I got those Z-bars from, hold on to the video tomorrow because I'm going to be featuring them in a review. Okay, what do we want to talk about next? Picking direction. Picking direction can have special importance with picking dimple locks, particularly those with security pins, and spools are actually very difficult if you don't pick a dimple lock correctly. To understand this point, we need to contrast the way in which we pick standard pin tumbler locks with how we pick dimple locks. On a standard pin tumbler lock like this one, we pick straight up and down in a way that doesn't usually impart significant amounts of torque to the to the core, I mean. That's not so with a dimple lock. With a dimple lock, we use a rotational motion when we pick, and obviously this is going to impart torque onto the core. So why does that matter? Well, recall that when you set a spool, you need to allow counter rotation. Well, what happens when your rotational picking motion is fighting that counter rotation? The answer is nothing, literally nothing. The pin will not move, and it's very tough to set that pin. So how do we avoid this? The short answer is that you should never try to pick and tension in the same rotational direction. You can do this by altering either your picking direction or your tension direction. With picking direction, some dimple keyways are such that you can pick them from either side. And when that's the case, great. You can consciously choose to pick in the opposite direction as your tension. This multi-lock 7x7 is a good example of that. You can see we can pretty easily either fit a tension wrench on the left side of the pins here and pick, or I can switch to a different kind of flag and pick from the right side. So in a lock like this, I'm always going to have options, and picking direction isn't going to be a big issue for me. On other locks, like this CISA Astral, we can't choose where we place the pick. There's really only one spot to put it, and that's on the right side of the pins. So what happens if we need to turn this lock to the right or clockwise when we are picking? Well, you're in a little bit of trouble. You have a couple options for what you can do. The first option would be to pick it in the opposite direction and then use a spinner tool like this to flip it over in the direction that you need it to go. But on things like padlocks, like this for example, that's not an option. This has the exact same keyway as that CISA, but you can only turn it clockwise. And that's going to be a big problem here because the keyway forces us to pick with a clockwise rotation on our pick. So what are our options here? This is the harder situation. You pretty much have two options. The first is you can deal with it. You simply face it head on, and let me tell you, it requires very light tension and an extraordinarily fine touch with your pick. There is another option that takes a little bit more time but far less skill. And that option is to map out the lock on a piece of paper. Spend a few minutes learning which pins will put you into a false set and which pins are spools. Then crank your tension way up to bind as many pins as possible and consciously choose your picking order such that you never go into a false set. And as a consequence, you're never required to allow counter rotation. Okay, well, for only discussing 2 issues, this video went on a lot longer than I expected, so I'm going to cut it off here. If you have any questions about this video or the techniques I discussed, please put them below. If you like this video and would like to see more like it, please subscribe. And as always, have a nice day. Thank you.